Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to tonight's launch of Friend Poems. My name is Casey Wei, and I'll be speaking tonight as myself and as Agony Klub. I'd like to begin our event by acknowledging that the five of us here in this Zoom space are actually gathered in real life on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'm very grateful to be able to live and work here and to be able to share this Zoom space tonight with all of you. So I will start by introducing the publication, and then we will hear from our contributors. I'll read everyone's bio before they begin, before they present, and then Steph will read mine when the time comes. So feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A, and the panelists can respond directly in the chat. And I'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A for questions and comments, and we can address them when the moment's right, or after we all finish our readings at the end for during the Q&A portion of the presentation. Okay, so I'll start by putting on my Agony Klub editor's hat and just give a little bit of background on Agony Klub for anyone who's not familiar with it. I started the Agony Klub project. It's a music and printed matter label and publishing project in 2016, and always from the very beginning with this idea, this desire to put out works within this framework of the popular esoteric, which for me is this idea of kind of as an artist who we're all kind of taught and trained and engage in the world with our critical artistic faculties as a way for us through that means to engage with popular culture by making a little bit, weird, a little bit esoteric, taking it back a little bit from capitalistic forces and whatnot. This is Friend Poems is Agony Klub's 27th release. It's one of three publications. This is the third publication, I believe. The other two are collections of essays, and also Agony Klub puts out it used to be twice a year, like a biannual magazine and mixtape, and now over the last couple of years it's slowed down a little bit just because of capacity to be a once a year magazine and mixtape called AK, and we're on the 8th edition of that. Friend Poems. I think I can set it up by reading from the preface just how this project came to be. And it was all actually kind of due to the pandemic. So, okay. So when the pandemic hit in March 2020, AK was prompted by a BCAC Arts Periodical Programs officer to apply for relief funding to help AK continue to do what it does. Reading between the lines of that email, I can't help but feel that the subtle implication of that encouragement I received is because AK is unlikely to ever get another grant. Self-situated in an uncomfortable nether region of classification, arts periodical, art book publisher, music label, and without a business plan, how could I expect for AK to compete against applicants with official mandates, boards, and distribution plans? And this is all perfectly reasonable to me. I'm happy for AK to continue to exist on a release by release basis with no deliverables to fulfill other than to exist as an intermittent artist project. All this to say, suddenly I had an unexpected 5K to fulfill a longtime project dream. I've had the urge to make a poetry anthology for some time now, and these funds allowed me to approach contributors with a reasonable budget. Poetry, poetics, has always been in the lining of my practice. It never has faced outward. What should a poem look like in 2020? And what should a poem written by an artist look like? The title Friend Poems appeared in my mind like a call from the sky. Oops, the sky. My ask was for each contributor to submit 10 to 15 pages of poems or poem-like content to this collection, with the framework being poems written that you'd share to someone, with someone you trust, as poems are quite an intimate thing, and putting that trust out there through the processes of making this book. Starting from this email, being in conversation with me as an editor and AK as a publisher, being alongside poems written by others, and then having the poems made into a physical object and having that object disseminated into the world for readers. I think about the idea of poetry, a poetry anthology, as a way to build trust through this abstraction of language, which often is used persuasively, argumentatively, instructively, and at times a weapon. So yeah, that's the impetus for this project, and I'm really happy to be able to work with my fellow contributors and who are my friends, and also again with Publication Studio Vancouver, who's helped me so much since the beginning of the project. So thanks, Kay. And I thought we could start with Kay, as that segue was like, it's not as smooth as I hoped it would be. So I'll end this my like blurb with my intro blurb by introducing Kay. Kay Higgins is an artist and cultural worker based in Vancouver. She was a co-founder of ArtSpeak Gallery and the Pacific Association of Artist-Run Centers, is co-proprietor with Kathy Slade of the Artist Press Publication Studio Vancouver, and was executive director of the Artist-Run Space Unit Pit projects from 2010 to 2019. She is currently head of publishing at Libby Leschgold Gallery at Emily Carr University of Art and Design and editor of ECU Press. Her work has included manufactured publications, handmade artist books, public inscription, photography, and internet-based projects. She has been a curator, editor, factory and warehouse laborer, technology consultant, and candidate for municipal office. Okay, take it away, Kay.
Hi, and thank you, Casey. First of all, I'd like to say I'm grateful to be here on the territories, the occupied territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I was born actually on the on Treaty 7 territory in Calgary. We were taught this in school, that we were on Treaty 7. We were never told that we actually had any obligations under the treaty as settlers, which is interesting, I guess, but predictable. I was overjoyed to be able to work with you, Casey. In doing these publications, I think they're incredibly smart. I think centering what we do on live music, which has been a big part of my life as well, even though I participate in it as a visual artist instead of a musician. And the lives of a lot of people I know. What is art school without art bands, anyway? So I was really, it was not the first time that Casey had asked me to contribute to a publication of hers, but it was actually the first time that I've actually done it. I wrote a lot of poetry in the 70s, and I briefly edited a poetry magazine in 1979. I stopped writing around 1985 when I was getting involved with having a lot of friends who were at the Kootenai School of Writing, and they were so amazingly good at it. I thought, yeah, maybe I should do something else. And maybe this isn't really my jam. And you know, the one thing I really objected to all the way through being involved in poetry and hearing it, and that was so refreshing about KSW, was that The autobiographical poetry in the 1970s was dire. I'm sorry, it was terrible. Everything was about I. Everything had a long, long explanation, long intro. In fact, when I was an editor of this magazine, I used to get people's CVs and they would talk about the girlfriends they'd had as like a way of giving a backstory to the poem. And I'm like, I don't want to hear this. Nobody wants to hear this. You're not that interesting. Anyway, what I've written is an autobiographical poem. And it's about a friend I had in the 1970s who's about 5 years older than me. I won't give you a lot of backstory. It's in the poem. Okay, you said about 10 minutes reading?
Yeah, like
I've taken a lot.
five to 10, whatever you feel comfortable with. Yeah.
Okay, I've taken a lot up with my intro, but I'm going to do, there. Okay. It's titled Chris. I learned about lyric poetry with your hand on my knee, only I didn't. Walking, police asked us for ID. I cadged smokes for you for later. Later we got high, it was okay. 1976, I skipped a day of classes and another day. 1977, we ran down the street at 2 in the morning. Later you were dead. I was not, or was not like you. I thought I should feel something other than just your hand. Later I was high. Your name on an obscure wall, you were not there. Later, not with you. Sure, we would solve language with urgency. You died long after a seizure kept you home that one night. You gently lifted my hair out of my coat and over the collar. I did not react to that, ever. Later, I cut off that hair like it would help somehow. Fuck. I expected you. The phone just rang, regardless. Your mother called you by a name, not Chris. It was written on a half stairway to a non-existent floor for years. The smell of that place and our clothes when we left. Those were places I hid and maybe you that didn't exist. The coffee house closed by degrees. Later, I made myself somebody else. Passing traffic screamed faggot. Men looked for fights. Somehow, I was wanted. On either side of the river lie long fields. I took only one punch to the face, I think. The cops offered to fuck you with a flashlight. This was just the way. Meanwhile, I was whoever was there or reflecting them. There was not much what I felt or didn't. I made some excuse. Peter and the Wolf is a lesser known era of Bowie. If I have to explain, there's less pleasure for everyone. On the landing, there was an awkward window and I nearly puked. I stuck my head out in the air while things kept spinning. This was because I was left on the floor in another place. This sort of life, while not necessary, seemed essential. Apartments with shared toilets carved out of old houses, pretty much all dust and splinters now. Later, I learned there is one thing that is terrible about you and everyone you know. Her boyfriend was always older because might be like that, might not be anything. Or does a separate book need writing? The glossary of terms from a teenager across the street. Penis and vagina described by a neighbor kid still makes no sense. Later, I was surprised with tongue, which was maybe the acid. There were boring hours without sleep before anywhere opened for breakfast. He was awkwardly laid out on the floor and hadn't moved for some time until we started laughing and woke him. He was part of a long procession of boys who said, if I had trouble with anyone, I should let them know. Maybe I didn't have that exact kind of trouble. In 1963, I had already learned nobody should want to be like that. Much later than that, the girl with peasant blouse and fucking was not enough for either for long. It is possible we are not ever what we are, or that nobody is for keeps. I thought I should oblige, only couldn't and didn't want to, except to be polite. Why are you hurting yourself and laughing? It is the most boring thing. Page. The girlfriend or whatever mentioned the walk. Years later, that was also me. Before this, my body did a thing. Maybe, if known, but those cases were not of me. I stood up quickly. Things went dim. You, not here. You weren't the first of my problems. That was much earlier or later. You were there at that time or not. Much later, it was bad as well. I didn't learn about the lyric. Those winters were hard for us, maybe. Hands on me, not on me, possibly twice. Someone taller later on, then there wasn't. You call that a blowjob? Touch doesn't last. I kept that to myself. This is later, so now you would know. Now that changes or not, in turn. At that time and for after, I could be just not well. But who knows natural from pictures? When the cold reached up to close my throat, it was average. This is something we should have told. Bricks echo nothing at night. When it was over, I hoped to live in a city with more frequent buses or anything. It was over early. On nights without rides, beside the river, that path past the bottom of a bluff. Fear, if I'm honest, of either someone else or me. That night we walked home from the house of the girl with damage. I left without saying, because. I was for kissing, but not touching, and against it. Swollen nipples meant skipping gym for a while. That was not long before, as these things go. In 1980, I wanted to be news. If you can't stop cutting your own hair, you can't stop cutting until bare patches are visible from the street. But that was years after, and as far west as I could get. In 1977 or 78, I was not shy exactly, but mostly quiet, they said, and ignored the shouting, unless I couldn't. That other girl's boyfriend was busted, and we kept vigil overnight at his mom's. Later, we shared a bath, as he wasn't coming home to the apartment where people knocked on the window. What she thought I never knew, didn't want to ask. But in part one, I didn't know you. They told me you had a nice voice. The second part, we listened to Nevermind the Bollocks on a fold-out stereo in your bedroom closet. At low volume, it made less sense than ever. Maybe there was a third part, me with that girl, and going to the labor exchange at 7 a.m. A room full of shuffling feet and smells. I misspelled your name, which, as it turned out, wasn't it. Maybe a fourth part. After moving and running and briefly winning and insults graffitied on a parking garage, you showed up at the stage after the set, after dark, after the cops. Neither of us belonged there. You more than me, or less. But hash plus tobacco in a rollie is not that strange. I watched you walk to the bus from the back of somebody's van. There were questions. A great river, several lakes, and some mountain ranges lie between me and a date so distant. Somewhere I stopped knowing about you. I knew sex, seizures, trips to the coast, Tennyson, and wild, and. I knew you had died and maybe hadn't changed your name, otherwise nothing. So all a matter of degrees then, because this is me talking. I was generally someone else, with possibilities, therefore defeated. Other times, mostly, we were there.
Thank you, Kay. It's really beautiful. And thank you for that introduction. It like really took me to another place. Okay, well, I guess we'll move on and return to this conversation in the Q&A. Up next is Colin Osler. Colin Osler is an interdisciplinary artist and musician based in Vancouver, BC. His work is informed by themes of cultural phenomena, memory recall, and nostalgia. He will be graduating from Emily Carr University with a BFA in Critical and Cultural Practices this spring.
Ready? Okay. Hi. So before I read a couple things, I'm just going to talk about them for a second. So when Casey sent out her initial ask for friend poems regarding notions of like poems you'd share with somebody you trust, or like using poems and poetry as a way to build trust, like through language, thought about how oftentimes I write in this style, at least. And I think this can be said for like a lot of writing that kind of walks between fiction and nonfiction. I try to maintain a sort of like hopefully acknowledged and like visible, foggy, but like clear picture of the subject. Like, of course, I want to mask, and I think like most writers do, like mask certain things that you're writing about, but only a little bit. So maybe like a light mask or something, like one that you can see through. Usually in my work, I focus on things like Casey said, like nostalgia, memory recall, and I think about ways in those things, how they can be like illusory, both in nice and like not nice ways. Kind of like asking if we can put trust in them or if we can rely on them, stuff like that. So the writing that I chose to include in like friend poems, I guess I kind of wanted it to be like the best like thin mask style of trust writing. And I'm not talking about like COVID mask or like that kind of thing. So I'm gonna read two of them, and the first one is kind of its own thing. The second one is from a series of writing about three generations of a family. It's like fiction. Three generations of a family that are basically like drowning in their own and others' memories and nostalgias, while the outside world kind of operates on like a no memory basis, kind of. But yeah, so I'll start with the first one. The first one is called "The Only Thing That Really Makes Sense Is the Road That Leads Me Home." I had a job some time ago where every day in our work truck, we'd drive really fast through a quiet section of road in Burnaby with lots of hills. Sometimes at the apex of a hill, I could feel my stomach jump a little, and I'd look in the mirror behind us and watch the leaves that we picked up that morning being scattered over the road we drive over the following day. It's easier when there's a little less leaves. When I walk to the grocery store late in the evening, I don't see any leaves. They only start to show up when winter approaches and then disappear again. Every now and then in the spring, you can come in contact with the leaves, but by midsummer, it begins to feel as cold as winter. I do appreciate the sporadic beauty leaves bring into life, but they can be so exhausting. I've savored my time away from them, to be honest. Sitting at his general manager desk inside of building number 36, a skyscraper in a small style city, Ko started to notice that both him and his coworkers are looking out of the window so much more often these days. From his special desk, he could see most of his floor if he looked through the doorway opposite the window, yet the desire to survey his employees only came about once a day, not at all related to performing his role of general manager. As a cloud engulfed the upper floors of the building, the sound of rain hitting the windows suggested to Ko that perhaps the warm computer mice in our hands are the perfect relief for this tropical loneliness. Ko looked through the doorway and noticed that everyone's face was turned towards the window, which, minutes later, was followed by the symphonic clicking of mice. That afternoon, he was okay playing his instrument, and the heat inside of his office fogged the windows. Ko drifted. As evening approaches and the sunset shines fully into our office floor, I will recall the year before last when our parent company had to install unbreakable windows on all of the floors in the building. Sometimes, after work, I'll stop by the bathhouse that's a few blocks from the metro station. I don't like baths, but the images I see in the steam help me pass the time until I return home and fall asleep. And then read the second one. This one is called Passing Letter 1. There's a bench on a hill that I like to sit on most mornings, but today it's raining. So I write this in the clouded light by the window, worrying about my eyesight. I'd like for this opening passage to act as some sort of transitional space or palate cleanser, like lime sorbet with mint tea afterwards, between your colorful world and the one in the following sections. This is my first time writing in many years, so bear with me. I've been making an effort to see all of the young people in my life recently. I visited my niece's house last month. She inherited it from her mother, who used to go by just N. Her daughter's name was S. Her house was fairly nice. It sat next to a freshwater lake and was in the northern country where it snows for half of the year. As we stood outside gazing into the dark forest, she offered to sell the house to me for a quarter of market value. I looked away towards the lake as a bird fell out of the sky and plunged into the water. I explained that this may be the last time we see each other for a long time, and she began to cry. We ate her favorite meal and had tea. Afterwards, S told me about a chest full of papers she found buried in the garden. They were mostly archives of her mother's correspondences with friends, but on the bottom was something very special. Many years ago, her mother, who never expressed much interest in literature or writing, wrote a novel. We spent the next few days together reading from the chest, taking turns with interpretations and translations. When we got tired, S would go for a swim in the lake, and I would walk through the forest. When waving our last goodbye, S insisted that I take the chest and keep it buried in my own garden, specifically underneath my dead rosebush. She looked towards the forest, then to the lake, and told me that these are her last days in the northern country, too, as she was planning on selling the property and moving to the city. So, dear reader, as a parting gift, I would like to show you the remaining fragments of N's novel, as well as some correspondences for context. I'd also like to apologize for this melodramatic prose, but please bear with me, as these surely will be my last words before my hands turn to dust. Thank you for your patience. Outside, underneath this endless rainfall, is the most beautiful world. As my body begins to crumble and my winter nears its end, I often find myself staring into the rooms of my home, as if searching for something I know will never return. Perhaps my eyesight is playing tricks again, but it seems as though every surface of my home has become reflective. My distant memories have grown ever present and often piercing, to the point of physical pain. The rain outside hasn't stopped for what seems like months. Like an old lantern hanging above an empty table, my heart swings in the cold wind from the open window. As the lantern fades and the blinds begin to let in a streetlight, a haze of memory once again fills my home, now accompanied by streaks of white floating through the air. Everyone finished eating, and now they're outside, smoking under their umbrellas and talking to themselves, talking about falling asleep while swimming to the small island in the center of the lake. Sadly, I never learned to swim, and it feels as though my generation has been left on the shore as an audience for this new kind of swimming movement. I think about my place on the shore and in the lake, I'd like to try and swim, but I worry. Would you rescue me, reader, if I were to sink? The island is filling and the sun is rising. The rivers of memory that flow through my heart freeze in an instant as 10,000 swimmers glide through the water in front of me. And that's everything I'm going to read today. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Colin. That was really lovely. I really love the kind of like the shifting perspectives and how you're talking about that like thin layer of masks, like this translucency kind of very like effective in the writing. So thanks for that. Okay, we'll move on to Tiziana. And I have Tiz's bio here. Tiziana La Melia was born in Palermo, Italy, and raised on an orchard garden situated on unceded Syilx Okanagan territory. Her artistic practice aims for holistic and non-binary considerations of matter, environment, ecology, memory, storytelling, place, and language transformed into poetry, painting, collaborations, video, drawing, and installation. She is working on a new project titled The Simple Life, Country Mouse, City Mouse, Hamster, mixing personal chronicles, Aesop fable, and reality television. Upcoming exhibitions and projects include Fly Robin Fly, Messène de Sud, Montpellier set, in Montpellier, France, a comics trip, Collection Lambert, Avignon, France, Global Cals 2020, Images Festival, Toronto, and a book of her poetry translated into Italian, edited by Sonia Dalto and Archive Books in Berlin/Milan. Thanks, Tiz.
Thanks, Casey and Kay, for making this book and for the invitation. It was, I don't know, I got really into making the selection of I guess I'll start by just talking about the title of the poems. I called it Cluttic Kink, and I kind of think of it as an ongoing sequence of poems and that were written between June and December of this year, of 2020. And like making these poems, I returned to some approaches that I was engaged with more in 2014, which was to like write and draw in my notebook, but also compose and like edit in Photoshop and using Photoshop software. And then the idea of the friend poem made me think a lot about how I started writing poetry, which was through email correspondence in like the early days of email. So even though I don't address directly like specific people, I am kind of thinking about that when I'm writing these poems. So the title Cluttic refers to a poetic form of the Cluttic hymn, which was a song or praise, prayer, or plea that appears in Greek tragedies. And the invocation is addressed to either a deity or a mortal or an animal or a plant or a mineral. Sappho wrote such hymns such as her devotional love poem and plea, the hymn to Aphrodite. The second half of the title Kink refers to both material conditions as well as spiritual mend narratives, or in other words, mending kinks, at the sake of accountability. But the poems also digress and return to subjects reflecting the psychic states I was in writing them, and also offer kind of clues to other projects that are all sort of interconnected. So that's my introduction to the poems. So, and the two photographs are of my grandmother's pajamas. So I just found myself taking photos of the text on her shirts, and they kind of became text and poems. So Cloud Veil. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, blink, Monday. Cluttic Kink. In consideration of molecular fictions, from reality TV to bullying cubes. I walked by my rose tonight, walked past pale yellow rose during twilight, surrounded by dark foliage and the garden shed. A sprout in the middle of the path, mostly dirt. 2 smaller sprouts to the right of the larger sprout. Pumpkin shows up at around 11:36 p.m. 2 elusive creeping vines merge with the blue sky, making a diagonal through time. I still smell rain directly from air. Will this die with me? Born in the glamorous dirt. Bluff. Spaced out is a form of scattered travel. Home is a relationship to condiments. Drop by drop. No tedium equals no plant cinema. By falling asleep, she notices scales of cycle. Woe catcher, catch my woes, veils for morning, touch and break, turn digital as in the delay of the contact of skin. Juicy, visit homespun maidens, touring with velour skins, separating from the gentle man, suited in fleece, baring teeth, blissed and hissed, protect you. Nah, 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 nah. Shepherdess in distress in a 2-piece sweat set. Sit and meditate on it. Meditate on the windfalls, not collected or fermented, rotting plums cemented on the drama of the winds, blowing the blonde grasses, girdled hope. Nah, every decision depended on the way the wind blew and broke the grass to revise history as mere nah, disheveled as fear and aging. Juicy on Paris, the finger swipes the universe of peach fuzz and hardware. Basic patterns for felt, potpourri. Say it with flowers, praying intensive. Baby's breath, love in the mist, cowslip, Cupid's dart, dandelion, forget-me-not, snapdragon, narcissus. Cooked water, bio broth, sup my salivate. Sitting all day, I'm soaked by stale air. A body saved for being bouillon, dissolved in humidity. OXO. The present fables. Wind, wind, breathe. Breath over my skin, breath over hot soup. We stew and simmer, glimmer, swallow, concentrated with 2 kinds of sage, like there are 2 kinds of people. A strange soup, angelic shoots, thorny suckers, skim, froth, sweep and listen. Aquacata means cooked water, is a bouillon slip, so herbaceous, verdant, funky, texture smooth or chunky, a souping intelligence, fiber, figures, fib, rose to rib. Cooked water is my memory biscuit, suck stones for basic mystics. Baby, seeds wrapped in dried wet wipes, seeds tucked between newspaper, cut seeds. Sometimes I write on a timer. There's a movie being filmed outside. Flies crawl up and down the neck of the lamp near winter. My feet are cold. My heart feels greasy. Since I've been here, I am simultaneous and tired. The stove distributes a dry and even heat. The tablecloth is covered in hair, kratom dust, and broken leaves. Body feed. Stocks exchange. Spills nutriment over the blanket. Fear makes the world go acious. Your latte frothed is the character of my love. Twist fingers, stiff fingers twist pasta dough into models of sacred dis. Comic geometry, priestly, nonplussed, the history of the private digestion of sound. First, collect rain from the sky or save a quart of tears. Bring out a sleeve of sweat. Forecast spill, bring to a boil, then simmer. Clouds settle over the ice on Swan Lake. All that ripens falls. Mama, midnight chef, oracle, condiment, wears a tomato crushed velour cap, spills the insides out, synthesized for worked internal lives, spin cycle of growth, return the flow, organized in form, the home Swiss factory. With borage, and I knew it as a seasonal hold on earth, held worlds with furs relaxed in simmering water, eating the dense tissues of closed petals under the metallic sun's grace. Are you Serotini? Necrescence, the death of the parent plant or branch, or hyacinths, wedding, or solescence, warming by the sun, or xerescence, drying atmospheric conditions, or pyrescence, fire, or bradyspore, the gradual release of seed from a cone or a fruit over a long period of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Tiz. And for those who don't have the book in front of you, yeah, Tiz's like contribution is so visual. There's so many elements of it that we're not getting to experience just by hearing the reading. So I suggest you get this book just for Tiz's visuals, if nothing else.
No, you have a lot of images too, Casey.
Just a couple. They were inspired by you. Okay, Steph's gonna help me out here now.
Okay. So Casey is an interdisciplinary artist, a musician, and writer based in Vancouver. Her practice has evolved from filmmaking into works that cross over between art, music, and community at large. For example, Kingsgate Mall Happenings in 2014, Chinatown Happenings in 2015, the karaoke music video Free Store in 2017, the Art Rock concert series from 2015 to 2018, which resulted in the film Art Rock, the popular esoteric, in 2018. In 2016, she began Agony Klub, a music and printed matter label that releases material under the framework of the popular esoteric. She plays in the music project Kamikaze Nurse and sometimes produces music videos and texts under the alias Karen Zolo. She is also co-founder and editor at Reissue.pub and founder and executive director of Art World Software.
Thanks, Steph. Okay. Yeah. So my bundle of poems were written, I guess, from March of last year till now. So it's like the post-pandemic poems. And the poems are they're interspersed with like found materials, like found text, and photos I've taken, and also just like research, just like borrowed text from research that I've just accumulated in like Google Docs and like notepad notes over the years. And I think my intention was to like give the poems more space to breathe, because I wrote them all in like this last year. It kind of feels like I needed to better situate them in like my whole practice, as opposed to just like this book for me to like understand them more. And I'm still like working through them, like even after printing and like fixing the typos, and I'm just like looking at like the poems and like how they sit on the page and like the breaks, and how like they're so different when I'm reading them in my head and then when I'm practicing, like reading the words out loud. So yeah, definitely still a work in progress. So I'll read a couple of things. Yeah, like something I've noticed throughout all of our readings tonight, that like there's a definite like running theme of like time passing and like mortality. And I don't know if that's specific to like our shared psychic spaces as friends or throughout the pandemic, or if that's just like what poetry is. I've been reading a lot of oh my god, what's his name, like Li Young Li, like that like Chinese American poet. I think that's his name, like Li Young Li, I think. And he talks about how like with every breath you take when exhaling, when reading a poem, the breath is dying. So all poems are about dying, which is like maybe a bit too romantic, but I kind of also like it. So yeah, this one's called Mudan. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's Mandarin for a type of hybrid tree peony belonging to the subsection Viginate, which actually reads like vaginate, and it's my mom's favorite flower. So, Mudan. No longer young, she is beautiful. The growth of her hair has nearly stopped. The line where she last died hasn't inched in years. Our glacial activity. Note to self, a present idea. Note to self, her favorite flower. The skin of her hands no longer take water. In the winter, the slightest touch will split open her fingers. Every crease opens, the eldest child wincing. Those same hands pulled schooling out from the paddy fields, wrapped hundreds of thousands of airplane meals, struck me the hope in the cause. No longer young, she is beautiful. And I'm also like, I try to challenge myself by trying to write a long poem that's like longer than 50 lines, and also just like longer than like a 2-page spread. And this one's like obviously has been the most challenging, and I feel like I was writing it as I was spending like a lot of time like because like Tiz and I are neighbors now, so we've been hanging out like in her garden over the summer a bit, and just like kind of like Tiz, as you were reading, I was kind of feeling like, oh yeah, the kind of like psychic kind of like bleed through of like the garden and the ritual of the domestic, I think kind of kind of permeated like my mind when I was writing, like working through the bulk of this one. So yeah, this one's called Celebration. Celebration. Right now, revolutionary action is on the phone. Grip these beads of infinity tightly, flip the card for the year, wear waves of red. Indented palms speak hello from beside. Unshackling breath take a withered pit, make life spin round this mold. Clutch for rote, cut into ritual, spread awake. Right now, smells on the table, tincture full of celebration under the neighbor's tomato runoff. The smell of pruned buds, shiso grows better this way. Flavor the miso universe with elastic labor, renewable grace. Stir and disperse the center whirl, around which rooting wisdom homes. To wine, to dine, and to wind, release in howls. Repeat musical chairs, on stumps the rain slaps. The snapping spit out the seed. Dew keeps us moist. Actors make the chattering muck scum of recollection worth recalling. Memories turn to mulch. It makes me retch how wretched I can be. Wet recycling in the alley, turn to wheat paste mache, turn to rust and to mold. Hard cheese on saltines, withstand the odor of sadness. Let's puzzle the pieces of the world and write the sacred manifesto. Let's drink in cups, more or less the same size. Over the red we wear, wreathed with hybridity, petals curl around the fray of feverish growth. Which bind the blood to the blue moon, the new and the bloom, the morning from night. As if the weather, as if natural, a halo forms from the inverse. Until right now, we kiss air expansive. The paths we lay from crumbs, our sinking lies reflect where the ground is no longer worth steadying. Weighted knowledge unbraid time, more or less the same stretch as reaching downriver to pick out paper phrases. Release from mind into memory, a perfect instance of ink succumbed to water, as mouth pulls from possession, the space between two lips, neither seal nor fully open. So that's my reading, and I will seamlessly transition back to Agony Klub and introduce Steffanie Ling. Steffanie Ling is a cultural worker and guest living on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. She is currently organizing Mark study groups on Discord and researching new work poetry, Situationist comic strips, and Soviet-era animation. Her books are NASCAR from Blank Check Press 2016 and Cuts of Thin Meat from Spare Room 2015. A forthcoming chapbook with House Press based in Montreal is called Mixed Martial Arts and coming out this year. Steffanie.
Thanks, Casey. I am very grateful for the company that I'm reading with tonight, and I just want to express a lot of gratitude for the opportunity to have collaborated with many of the people that I'm reading with and many of the people who are in the audience, and that my friends are this is going to sound so trite, but like I think that in a way, I think my friends are kind of like my muses, in the sense that so much of the thinking happens when we're not in the space of thinking, but in the space of eating, drinking, joking, laughing, hanging out. And this is like by no means like a new idea, but I think it's very like integral to informing the other thing that's really important in my life, which is like my political life. And I think that my friendships and my politics are something that I try to collapse in my poetry very often. So yeah, I'll just like, that's all I really have to say about friend poems. For now anyway. So I'm gonna read a poem that is actually not by me, but was written by my friend Nathan Crompton, and he wrote it and gave it to me on my birthday when I turned 27. Yeah. And it's called In Praise of Rest. Person of gold, on slopes of ardent firs with unemployed energy. Let two just rest, enters the person on the seat of June. Cavalier and knowing, pictures of lunch. Pigments often immobile, concrete torsion put upon each laid ember. There's a picture of the poem in the book too. And then I'm going to read a poem that I wrote for my friend Sid on her birthday, which was also celebrated in the same on the same island, Gambier Island. And in it, it references a photo that she took of me on my birthday when Nate wrote that poem and gave it to me. So this poem is called The Horizon in the Hole. The days of me taking you down a notch are over. The days of you raising yourself, but mostly others, have been elapsing for 30 rings around this lemon sun. We all think ourselves into selfish, sour spirals, but we can see for each other that the spiral is a pool we're actually going to be complicated and okay in. Floating and eating as we are on the days around your birth, the day we have to share across weeks since we can't be in the circle at once with all the others you raise and who raise you in the pool. We do lengths between the shallow and deep end of our bar, a park, or a shore where you make evidence of me in water, and incriminates this one as a person who is soft and aware that her basic boy problems pollute the shallow end of the otherwise deep and rigorous pool of why can't everyone and everything just be like this or that or just better, just as good as you, on time, on the clock, working with everyone so that no one has to anymore. Taking the minutes because you notice no one else is doing it at this meeting. The meetings that look like we're just chilling around an empty pizza box and gouged six-packs that sponsor the gentle criticisms through the day of prodding analysis and egos across movements so brittle that they could snap, and we'd be plunged into another hole filled with something chuggable. Still, we float and do swim towards the horizon in the hole, making soft and fun evidence that proves we can win, as we have when we text and meet an hour later in the understood monosyllabic replies, together punching up in the policy-making, chain-smoking, loving, and shit-talking loops of our comradeship. I'm just going to read one more. This one's called Extremely Annoying Poem. This courage has a lack of strategy and seeks extremely annoying truths to better understand the quite bad things we do to each other. That grim appraisal waits for the bus, which arrives on time. Okay, fine. The system works sometimes, but I'll still be 15 minutes late for dinner and the better idea. I try to examine this poor tendency I have to leap over my own dead body towards the erotics of transgression without checking for incoming traffic, mall security, and other people's feelings. And over my dead bank account, I grasp a bag of sundries neither of us can really afford, but something about abundance and something communal luxury, which you think is a pretentious concept. I simply disagree, but the friction of collective grasp feels more imaginary today than most days. I'm coming over to let you win all tonight's arguments, but now that I'm here seated at your table, you want me to lower my expectations because you've had a long day of self-loathing that you'll fill me in on. Then I realize that on my way here, I dropped my cigarettes. You take a few from a pack you usually don't have and put the rest in my pocket. This stills the stubbornness of the padding search. In my pocket, you put something nicer than having an argument, something less dampened by ambition, with less stakes in figuring it all out. Tonight, minimal psychic risk at your table for two friends who are extremely annoyed by the economics of having courage but no money and just needing to talk it out, quite often, actually. It really is our idea of a good time, but no more instituting of critiques, no more getting by on getting mad all the time at the extremely annoying things. We consume this dinner and the expensive things. I find your proposition a lucid critique. Why do you have to talk like that? Because it's fun. If I can't have complexity, I can't have simplicity, then I may as well kill myself. We don't get around to talking about self-loathing or any other kind of loathing that night. Thanks.
Nice sentiment to end on. If I can't have it, I'm gonna kill myself. That concludes the reading portion of Friend Poems. We're doing pretty good for time. We stayed within an hour. I'm not sure how everyone's like Zoom brains are doing by the end of the week. If there are any questions from the panelists to each other, we could talk about them now. I don't think there's any questions from our audience, so if they come up at some point, I'm happy to throw one in there as well. I could start. I actually do have a question for all y'all, and yeah, it's like maybe it's more of like a rhetorical question, but I'm actually interested in every one of your responses to this question that I have, which is the framework that I gave you which was kind of random. It was just like friend poem seems like a fun thing to do, a nice thing to do, so I'm just gonna like run with it. But if I had approached you with any other sort of like with a looser framework, I guess, not one based on like, you know, like friendship is like space of trust and caring, or like using language as like a way of like building trust through like, you know, like a existing friendships already. Like if I had come to you and said like, I'm putting together a collection of poems just about like, you know, life during the pandemic times, like, would you be interested? What would your like, would you have said yes, or how would you have felt about, you know, that? If it wasn't friend poems, if it's just like, hey, I'm doing a poetry anthology, do you want to submit some poems? I guess my question is, how do you feel about the framework, friend poems? Anyone?
Yeah, that's big. It's really big. But I mean, when I started actually writing, I wasn't thinking so much about the framework anymore. It's just that it underlies everything. I think our circumstances in the pandemic have upended some of our ideas about privacy and probably by extension intimacy. Because, you know, here we are. We have, all of us, extended the into some intimacy that we would reserve for friendship to a public, right? I am here with a public in my apartment talking about my teenage sexuality, which is not really a thing I do. Certainly, like, I've never done super easily. I don't know. I want to come back actually to what you said, Casey, about poems being about dying. And I mean, you could talk forever about the death drive and how it works in literature, but I think also in like electronic communication, here we are disembodied. We're in like the spirit realm right now. This is a kind of provisional afterlife in which we all get to be with each other again. You know, like your friends are gone, but you get to be with them. That's heaven, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is really strange. Kay, you're on here twice. Is that true for anyone else? There's 2 Kay Higgins, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's not, I can't do anything about it now. But
no,
yeah,
that's fine. Yeah.
Disembodied me is maybe not me.
Yeah, I think like for me, the framework, I sort of just similar to Kay, like stop, like I kind of worked completely intuitively and just trusted that like it would kind of connect to the subject, or like that there was something inherent about like how you were inviting people that kind of formed these connections. And then I think if your topic had been the pandemic, I probably would have written the same poems. Like I don't think it would have changed. Though I was like thinking a lot about grief and in a process of like intense reconnection, actually, like while making these poems, despite and feeling like in a strange way like a lot closer than I had been even before the pandemic to certain people that were like either who are present or not in the poems. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isabel says, thanks everyone for kidnapping my brain tonight. Zoom equals afterlife. Well, heaven is probably worse. Probably is, actually. Well, that's the only sort of question that came up for me. I just really just loved hearing these poems kind of activated by your voices and not just, like reading them like on the page. I don't know, is there anything else? I'm sorry, I like should have prepared more questions, but I didn't. Yeah, people should buy the book and experience it for themselves. There's many beautiful, like it's a beautiful book, black and white and colored pages with lots of things that could not be communicated in the reading, a whole like notes section. Sorry, I'm just looking at the comments right now if there's any questions. Okay.
Yeah, and she mentioned too, like that's also a really intimate thing, the book, because you and I made it with our hands.
Sure did.
Physically made the books with our hands. And, probably has little faces on it. So that's another way we're like getting up in your stuff, being a little too close, not having appropriate boundaries.
It's weird that we would think that now. Like there's no way that would have ever been the thought in my mind before COVID.
I have a question, Casey. Are there any boundaries in friend poems?
Can you elaborate? What do you mean?
I really love this idea that like there's like, well, obviously there's intimacy, but like in the poetry, or intrinsic intimacy in friend poems. But everyone knows that a good friendship needs boundaries. So I wonder if it's like the task of the poet to like, I don't know, allude to boundaries while also like using intimacy as like the material in the poems. Because I feel like all the poetry I write is super embarrassing, but I like put up a lot of boundaries because I just talk about really banal things.
That's a good point. I wonder about that, like, because like me as an editor in this way, like I was really like hands off. I don't think I asked anyone to change anything. It was more like, I'm going to put these together, the everyone's contributions together, and if there's something you don't like about the choices I made, or if you notice like a typo, just like let me know. So I was very like hands off with it, because I was like, if this is a space of trust, then if something was really flying off the rails, I probably would have said something. But everyone seemed to have a good grasp on their own boundaries, and like, you know, the boundaries of like the working relationship. I found. Yeah, but that's a very interesting point. Like, sometimes I'm not really sure what the boundaries are. Like, even I kind of mentioned Stan Persky in the notes, and I'm reading his like book right now, and it's like just very autobiographical, and just like names are dropped, and I'm just wondering, like, if I ever were to write a book like Colin, like you like named people as like letters of the alphabet, like where does that responsibility, or where do those boundaries, like where do you draw the line as like an author? So yeah, but I trust all of you.
I sort of have like a very unintelligent answer to your earlier question as to like what I would have said if you said the pandemic, if they were like pandemic poems.
Yeah, I would never do that though. It's so like cheesy.
I was like, I'm pretty sure I would have said yes, because I'll just like, because if you ask me to do something, I'll just do it, Casey.
Thanks, Steph. Like, I mean, like, I hope if I had asked you all to be like, hey, I'm creating this like collection called Pandemic Poems. Do you want to submit something? I'd hope that one of you would say, do you want to like change the title to something else?
I'm pretty sure I would have done that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely room for that. Like, yeah, it's also something I'm definitely learning through like editing the 3-issue and stuff, just like being able to like offer like criticism, but in a really constructive and actually just like in a way that it comes from a place of like care, not from a place of like judgment. And I'm still working to like yeah, that's obviously like an ongoing like lifelong lesson that I'm very like, I'm happy to be the editor, and I'm happy to like corral content and to participate in it too. I think it's like it's fun for some reason for me. It's a Virgo in me, so. Okay, well, should we leave it there? Any parting thoughts?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm just real happy to be here with all of you, and this is an amazing thing. And you know, people should buy the book.
People should buy the book. No pressure, but yeah, you should buy the book.
Really good idea. And yeah, the quality of the exchange is very much, yeah, I think it is based really on a phenomenal amount of trust. And I'm so happy that that exists.
Yeah, me too. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Let's all have a really lovely Friday night off Zoom. I'll text you all later. Okay, bye.